everything you do from then on is different.
One of the detectives, I think his name was
He was a
Derek.
golden boy.
And all we can do right now is come together.
Extreme domestic violence, multiple rapes.
Hey, so glad to have you on Life Support, and we're going to talk about some things that are really important in our time together. Kim Pareigat joins me. She's a licensed psychologist and, truth be told, a longtime friend as well.
Yes.
Kim, it's so great to have you here. Thanks for coming here.
Thank you for inviting me.
And there's a lot going on in our world, and one of the areas of your expertise is trauma when it comes to families.
Yes.
And the people that listen to this program know some of my story and some of the things that our families dealt with, loss of a mother, loss of a son, and those types of things. And I can talk about the toll that's taken on our family, but you have seen so many other families in the midst of your practice and your experience and so forth. So let's talk a little bit about trauma and the church and response to trauma and all those things. So here's what I'm going to just make it really easy to start with. The church is not very good at dealing with trauma in families, in my opinion. So that's my easy first question.
I agree with that, yes.
So what do you think? Why is that, Kim? Why does the church struggle to deal with trauma?
I have always thought that part of the problem is that trauma, by its very definition, means that somebody has been through something that is intense emotionally, where they have felt very much helpless or out of control, and perhaps even have felt the sense that their life is threatened. Whether it's actually threatened or not doesn't matter. It's the sense that they have lost control. So there's deep pain. There is great intensity when somebody has been through trauma. And I think as a culture, we don't do pain very well. As a church, we would really like to kind of make everything be rosy and good. And so if someone is honest about the pain that they're in, or about the intensity of their feelings or their failures or struggles in relationships, it can be really scary to know how someone might respond to that.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the church is just a reflection of our American culture at this point?
Well, in many ways, of course it is, because that's the context that the American church is in American culture. I do see some signs that it's changing. I do see churches that are willing to embrace difficult situations. There are many churches, yours is one of them I know, that has opened the doors to people with disabilities to share the gospel, to minister to them and their families, because there's a lot of needs that come along with that. That is a fairly new phenomenon as far as I'm aware. I also see churches developing outreaches to people in certain groups, affinity groups. There's divorce care, there's grief share, there's programs and curricula that are designed to meet specific needs of people in the church. And that actually really encourages me, because there's nothing quite like meeting with other people who maybe don't have the exact experience that you do, but they have the emotional awareness of the same things you've been going through.
Yeah. When Jesus walked the earth, in the culture that he was immersed in, dealt with this entirely differently. And if you even go over to the Middle East now, you see a complete difference in how death is dealt with and so forth. Very hands-on. I don't want to say normalized, but much more normalized.
It's much more out in the open. Right?
Yeah, it's much more out in the open. The grieving is out in the open,
right.
Weeping, wailing, and that kind of thing.
Right.
Why are Americans so closed off? Are we afraid?
Well, this is like 100% my opinion. This is not based on any
That's
kind
why
of
you're
study
here,
or anything. But what I really think it is that one of the things that American enculturation does is it sends a very strong, very clear message that you are in control. You are in control of your destiny. You're in control of what happens to you this week and next week and 5 years down the road. And that's a huge lie. That is an unreality. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But it is part of our culture to think I can be self-sufficient. I can handle whatever comes my way. And if I show that I'm not handling something well, that's kind of tantamount to destroying my identity, right? And saying, gosh, I'm struggling with this, but I can't let anybody know that because the expectation is I can handle it, right?
Right.
And that's where one of my pet peeve things comes from, one of the Bible verses that I hate the most, which is actually not in the Bible, which is God never gives us more than we can handle.
Right.
And that's an unreality, that's a lie, and that distorts so many people's thinking about themselves and about their situation and even what they can do about it.
Yeah, good old folk theology
Right.
to steer our thinking processes. So then what happens is when someone does experience trauma, then isolation comes, right?
Absolutely. Trauma is a disconnection on so many different levels. And so if a person experiences trauma, and this can be something someone does to someone else, this could be just things that happen in life. It could be natural disasters like a storm or a fire, those kinds of things. But you can become disconnected from yourself because of the overwhelming fear, the overwhelming sense of helplessness. And so trauma at its very root is a disconnection. And part of the clinical symptoms of somebody who's been traumatized is that they avoid any reminder, any reference, maybe even like a place or a smell or anything that might remind them of the trauma that took place. So avoidance also helps with disconnection, and it cycles on itself.
And then I'm guessing the friend group or whatever group that person identifies with, whether it be a family, church group, or whatever, are also then experiencing that either through that person or becoming frustrated because they don't understand why the behavior is changing.
Exactly.
And then you have even more of a division.
Right. The person feels alienated from themselves, but because maybe they aren't even able to assess or express to themselves what they've been through, they certainly can't share it with someone else. I had a little 4-year-old client many years ago who choked on a potato chip. And it wasn't life-threatening, but it was very, very scary for her. And her response to that was to not eat anything. And so she came to therapy because she was losing weight, and you never want to see a 4-year-old lose weight. But her explanation to herself is eating food will scare me. And so she wouldn't eat anymore. So we were able to use play therapy, and she did some incredible play with a doll that wouldn't take a bottle and wouldn't eat. And she resolved it by being able to express, I am so hungry, but I am so afraid to eat. Not in those words, but that's
right.
The connection she made. And once she got reconnected with her own emotions and her own actual hunger, she was able to do that again.
So if you have a child like that, and I have children like that have been through stuff, and you take them to play therapy and you work through all these different processes, and you, at one point, they look at you and say, I'm not going anymore to anyone. You feel incredibly isolated because none of your friends understand what's going on with your children.
As a parent. Yeah.
And so you're taking your kids to all these places, and you're tuned in 100% to what's going on with them.
Right.
But you take them to community group, or you take them to children's ministry, and I'm not picking on the church, but that's our context. No one knows what to do with them.
Right.
So the first reaction is, let's just get them out of here.
Right.
And
Which
that's
only-
not good for anybody.
That reinforces the disconnection.
Right.
Right.
So how can a church come alongside of a family without being obtrusive, but yet understanding that there's more there than I really understand, but they need someone? How does that work? How can that be done?
I think part of what needs to happen is that the parents in that situation will need to be very selective about who they trust
So you narrow the group.
And what they're able to share. And especially if the child is the one who's been traumatized, I think it's very important not to speak for the child and not say more than the child is able to or willing for other people to know. And maybe that's an empowering thing to do with the child is what can we tell people at church or at school so they can understand what it's like for you sometimes. And if the child can construct an amount of sharing that they're comfortable with, and then parents can share that with key people, maybe a Sunday school teacher or a student ministries leader, then they're on notice. And then the parents and the leader can maybe strategize what you'd like to do about that. Would you like to include the parents then if there's a difficult situation, or would you like to have the child make a determination about what they'd like to do? You can stay, but if you're feeling this intensely, maybe you want to take a break, maybe you want to take your friend over in the corner and do something quiet, or whatever kind of creative and useful things people could think of.
Right.
Part of our culture too is that we just do everything in a herd. And so it's very difficult to make individual allowances for someone's emotional state. But it starts with being informed. I mean, if a leader doesn't know, or maybe some of the kids or something, it's very difficult.
Yeah, I think that in our family, we've kind of broken it down to what's the company line going to be. When you're asked, what's wrong, or
Sure.
what was that like? You empower the kids to know how to at least say enough.
Yes.
But what we've also found is that as we've gone to different leaders, whether it be at school or church or community activities or so forth, some of them are like sponges. They'll soak it up. They'll put into practice what you want them to. They really care.
Right.
Others just don't either have the capacity to understand, or they are too fearful to engage it.
Right.
And I think that's where the church has to kind of rise above to the next level. The problem is we have volunteers. We're all
Right.
we're a volunteer-run organization,
Exactly.
basically.
Exactly.
So I guess training then becomes a huge factor in a church. Training your staff, training your volunteers, and like you
Right,
said earlier,
because
it's happening.
without training, the volunteer comes and has probably a whole list of ideas about what the expectations are of them, what they're supposed to be able to handle, all that, American, I can do it kind of stuff.
Yep.
And if there's a child who's struggling or a child who's acting out and the volunteers don't have any clue about that, it's very likely that it triggers some of their own emotional difficulties or the things that they've been through or, the unease with which they deal with emotions. When you said some people might not have the capacity, I mean, there's a real thing called emotional intelligence, and some people have a lot of it, and some people don't. And so training would help even to uncover who are some of the people that you really can have as assets and allies for people who are struggling, and who are some of the people who maybe should be in different kinds of volunteer roles.
Right. So when you have a client or someone talking to you about their own particular trauma and they're fearful of engaging and they don't see the church as being safe. We unfortunately as ministry leaders, you're also a ministry leader and so is your husband, and you've seen people leave the church because it's no longer safe for them, at least in their perception of it.
Right.
How can a pastor, do you think, this is again, your opinion, and how can a pastor begin to set a DNA of a safe church, a church where people can come and know they have a shot at being who they are and not feeling like they have to run out of there? Because that's a reaction a lot of people have. Get me out of here.
Sure.
Right.
Well, there's part of trauma too is not wanting to be exposed. Afterwards. I want to have, since I was so out of control in the experience of the trauma to begin with, I now want to have control over the message or the amount that you know about
So there's
me.
like a trying to regain some traction.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And in kids, one of the primary ways that you see a post-traumatic child acting out is in their high need for control, like to the point where other kids don't get a turn, other kids don't get to pick the game. I mean, really, really highly controlling. And that's a response to the really out of control experience that they had. I got lost kind of in that. What were you
That's okay.
asking?
We're just talking about how somebody could feel, how a pastor
how the
can set a
pastor-
DNA
yeah.
that's safe. Yeah.
Well, I think that absolutely starts with the pastors being transparent. And again, to the extent that it's possible and safe for them to share where they have vulnerabilities. And it may not be trauma, but it may just be their own vulnerabilities or where they've made mistakes or where they've had conflicts or concerns in the past. I think that goes a really long way to helping people to feel safe. Okay, that guy's not standing up there telling me he's perfect. That guy's up there telling me he's a real human being with real feelings and real experiences. And I've had some of those. So maybe this is an okay place to be.
Right.
And then if as leadership is developed, whether that's elders and people who have a role in interacting with people or volunteers in Sunday school or whatever it is, as those people become more experienced and are supported in whatever they've gone through, they can pass that along. I mean, I think we have a compassion deficit in our culture, and especially as we see the things that are going on in terms of the racial injustice and all of those kinds of things, and this whole notion of the cancel culture. It's like it's not compassionate. It's not oriented around forgiveness. It's around judgment and let's just get you out of here. You know,
right.
Whether you be on a statue or
Yeah,
in the next room, if you've made mistakes, you're done for. And that is definitely not what the gospel's about. You know, if you've made mistakes, Jesus is the answer.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's where our hope is. And if we can give people the experience of being listened to, the experience of being understood, even if we as church leaders can't fix things, because we probably can't, but at least we can point people to hope. And we can help people, you know, we're renewed by the transformation of our mind, not, you know, the transformation of our life circumstances or our
Government
pocketbooks
or
or
whatever.
government isn't going to change things. But if we're renewed by the transforming of our minds, then we need input into our minds that's going to be accurate, it's going to be based on truth, it's going to be based on the gospel, so that people can know with absolutely no reservation, God loves me, and there is nothing that can change that. And that is such a hopeful experience for people that I think that would be a goal, you know, to be able to get people to the point of understanding that.
I'm a little concerned that they're going to cancel the statue they're going to make for me here at
Really?
Ridgewood.
Yeah.
They might take that down at some point.
Wow.
But it's interesting that you went down that road of cancel culture, because I've never really considered how it affects the church inside the church. I've always been fearful that we're going to engage it outside of the church and be a bad witness and so forth. But wow, you can see the logic there, though, that if people are being shamed and shut down out there for everything you say, where you're not even sure what T-shirt to put on anymore to
Right.
go out the house,
Right.
then when is that going to make its way into the church, where people are going to just say, like, I'm shutting down here too because it's not safe anywhere? And that, to me, it frightens me, because we have made inroads, like you said, but it seems like it would be incumbent upon all believers to not let that seep into the church.
Right, but it requires an accurate understanding of the Word of God when it comes to who God is and what God is like. And He is slow to anger. He's abounding in great love and compassion, and He's offered us forgiveness. And that's not out there. That's in here. That's what makes the church the church.
Right, right. And that's why the church has to remain the church.
Right.
Because the culture so desperately needs the church to be the church, but the people in the church need the church to be the church as well.
To them, yes.
And I'm always shocked at when I'm just scrolling through Twitter. Everything is hyper personal.
Yes.
Mocking. Every politician is mocked. Everyone's a dunce. Everyone's an idiot. Everybody's this or that. It's not anymore. I don't like that policy. Mm-hmm. That's not the way it is anymore.
No.
And for Christians to begin to engage in that, it's not just harmful to how non-believers see us. We are damaging an image bearer of God, and God loves everyone equally, even if they're not believers.
Right.
He wants them to come to faith.
Right.
But somehow we seem to think that, well, we don't want to harm a brother or sister, but let's go at it. And I don't like that either. I don't think that's healthy.
No.
And I don't think I don't think the things we're talking about here are enabled by that. I think it just shuts people down, causes people to live in anger and frustration.
And lose hope.
Is that an issue that you deal with a lot? Is hope a big issue for trauma
Hope
victims?
Is huge. Mm-hmm. Huge, because clinically, one of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder is a sense of a foreshortened future. And so putting that into normal human language is a loss of hope. Like, my life's never going to get any better than this. This defines my life. My life is over.
Wow.
And if there's a loss of hope, then there isn't much to move forward for.
Right.
And so that's where the healing really needs to take place.
Well, I want to talk more about hope next time we're together, because that's a great place to end it, because that is something we have in droves in the church, is hope to give.
Let's hope we do.
Yeah. Kim, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it so much.